On a quiet morning in July 1995, Krissy collapsed at her family home and never woke up again. She was only 17 years old. The tragedy struck so suddenly that it left her sister Nikki shattered and the entire fashion world in complete shock. It seemed impossible that a star burning so brightly could fade so painfully fast, leaving behind a whole lifetime of promise that would never be fulfilled. A far cry from the perfect doll image of her sister Nikki, Krissy was the wild child of the 90s, free-spirited, edgy, obsessed with rock music, and possessing a sharp beauty full of fire. People adored her not just because she was a supermodel sister, but because she dared to be real, rebellious, and absolutely hated the fake glitz of the industry. Krissy Taylor remains forever 17, the most vibrant yet heartbreakingly fragile flower the fashion world ever saw. The 1990s were dominated by the era of the supermodel. Deities like Cindy, Naomi, and Linda, who ruled the cultural landscape with an untouchable high-gloss glamour. It was a world of impossible standards and icy perfection. Yet amidst these statuesque figures, the public began to crave a shift, a desire for something authentic, radiant, and possessing the distinct, sun-drenched energy of Florida. This fresh vitality emerged from the Taylor household. Far from the cutthroat ambition of typical stage parents, the family was an oasis of traditionalism, governed by a father in the highway patrol and a fiercely protective mother. This grounding provided a sanctuary, keeping the sisters' feet firmly planted on the ground, even as the industry around them drifted toward excess and heroin chic. While Nikki Taylor was the first to ascend with her classic, soft, girl-next-door perfection, Krissy entered the frame with a completely different spirit. She wasn't there to simply walk in her sister's shadow. She was the rebellious counterpoint to that perfection. Krissy was the missing piece of the puzzle, a raw, spirited fire, ready to redefine what a model could be. Kristen Erin Taylor was born on May 15, 1978, in Miami. If Nikki was the calm waters, Krissy was the spark. She was the firecracker. To those who only saw her on the cover of 17 or Elle, she was a poised, elegant young woman. But if you asked anyone in her inner circle, her family, her close-knit group of friends known as the Redneck Girls, they would tell you a completely different story. Krissy was a tomboy in the truest sense of the word. She stood 6 feet tall by her mid-teens, a towering figure even among her peers. But she didn't use that height to strut down school hallways. She used it to dominate in sports. Krissy was happiest not when she was being powdered and preened, but when she was covered in mud, sweat, and adrenaline. She loved paintball, relishing the tactical chaos of the game. She was an avid rollerblader, tearing through the Florida streets with the wind in her blonde hair. She loved jet skiing, bouncing hard across the chop of the Atlantic waves. In the Taylor household, getting Krissy into a dress was not a fashion statement. It was a battle of wills. She detested makeup. She hated the fuss. She would choose a bruised knee over a blow-dry any day of the week. There is something profoundly endearing, and now heartbreaking, about the real Krissy. Despite the trajectory of her life, she didn't aspire to be the next Kate Moss. She didn't want to live in a penthouse in Manhattan. Her journals and private conversations revealed a much more grounded ambition, one that stood in stark contrast to her career. She wanted to be a housewife. She wanted a family. She wanted the quiet domestic life that her chaotic jet-setting career kept postponing. She found joy in the simple comforts: baking chocolate chip cookies with Barbara, the smell of the dough filling the kitchen, and watching the movie Grease on repeat, singing along to the songs she knew by heart. Her entry into the fashion world was almost accidental, a byproduct of the magnetic pull of her older sister. Krissy began modeling at age 11, essentially tagging along with Nikki to shoots. It was the classic case of the little sister shadowing the big sister, wanting to be part of the world Nikki was building. But the camera is a strange beast. It captures things the human eye sometimes misses. The photographers and agents realized quickly that the Taylor magic wasn't limited to Nikki. They were two sides of the same beautiful coin. Where Nikki was soft and classic, Krissy had an edge, a spirited, wide-eyed look that felt modern and electric. Her rise was not a climb, it was a launch. Imagine, if you can, being 13 years old. Most of us at that age were struggling with algebra, fighting awkward growth spurts, and navigating the brutal social hierarchy of middle school. At 13, Krissy Taylor was in Milan. She was walking the same runways as Naomi Campbell and Christy Turlington. She signed with IMG Models, one of the most prestigious agencies on the planet. The dissonance between her two lives was staggering. On a Tuesday, she might be in Paris, wearing a dress that cost more than a car, surrounded by adults who treated her like a muse. By Thursday, she was back in Pembroke Pines, sitting in a classroom, just another student trying to finish a history assignment. Between the ages of 13 and 17, she accumulated a portfolio that veterans of the industry worked decades to achieve. 13 magazine covers, features in Italian glamour, Cosmopolitan, Rolling Stone, and the holy grail of fashion, Vogue. She was a regular on MTV and Entertainment Tonight. She and Nikki became a brand, the Taylor sisters, a symbol of wholesome American beauty that could sell anything from CoverGirl makeup to high fashion. Yet, despite this whirlwind of success, Ken and Barbara weren't just strict, they were intentional. They understood the industry and built guardrails that were years ahead of their time, implementing rules that baffled other agents but saved their daughters. Krissy never traveled alone. She was always accompanied by a guardian, often her parents. They were notoriously strict about image. No excessive nudity, no compromising situations, no grunge shoots that made the girls look strung out or dirty. This wasn't just brand management. This was parental love in its fiercest form. They were trying to preserve Krissy's childhood in an industry designed to strip it away, layer by layer. By the summer of 1995, the Taylor sisters were on top of the world. Their final major photo shoot together captured the essence of their lives perfectly. It was for the July/August 1995 issue of Ocean Drive magazine. The cover featured Nikki and Krissy together, the sisters, the best friends, forever frozen in that moment of sun-kissed perfection. They looked invincible. They looked like the future. But beneath the surface of that golden summer, something was wrong. The camera captures light, but it cannot capture the electrical impulses of the heart. It cannot see the hidden ticking clocks inside our own bodies. As the humidity rose in Florida that July, the stage was being set for a tragedy that would shatter the American dream and reveal a terrifying medical reality that no one, not even the doctors, saw coming. This looming reality stood in stark contrast to the sisters' public image of invincibility. While the gloss of the magazine cover suggested a life of eternal summer, the biology of the younger Taylor sister was quietly rebelling. The transition from the golden era of the Taylor sisters to the tragedy that would define them was not marked by a dramatic fall from grace, but rather by the subtle, insidious creeping of a reality that no camera lens could capture. We often look back at tragedies through the lens of hindsight, searching for the jagged edges, the warning signs that we surely must have missed. In the narrative of a celebrity death, the public expects a descent. We expect a story of addiction, of erratic behavior, of a star slowly burning out before it explodes. But the terrifying reality of Krissy Taylor's final year was its normalcy. There was no descent. There was no spiral. There was only a girl living her life surrounded by people who loved her, unaware that her body was waging a secret, silent war against itself. Earlier, we saw Krissy's athletic side, the jet skis, the rollerblades, the mud, and the adrenaline. But what looked like simple teenage energy later became the key to understanding how her hidden illness pushed her body harder than anyone realized. Yet increasingly, this strength was being undercut by a confusing weakness. She began to complain of a specific nagging sensation, a shortness of breath. It wasn't the gasping of someone who is unfit. It was a tightness, a feeling of heaviness in the center of her chest that would descend upon her without warning. There were moments of lightheadedness, spells where the edges of her vision would blur, where the ground seemed to tilt beneath her feet. In one instance, while working on a photo shoot, she felt faint. In another, after a bout of exercise, she struggled to regain her rhythm, gasping for air in a way that seemed disproportionate to the exertion. To the outside world and even to her family, these were concerning but explainable. It was the Florida heat. It was dehydration. It was the stress of a jet-setting lifestyle. Or perhaps it was simply anxiety. The Taylor family, responsible and protective as ever, did what any loving family would do. They sought medical help. They took Krissy to the doctor. And it was here, in the sterile safety of a medical office, that the tragedy was inadvertently sealed. The doctors listened to her symptoms, they looked at her history, and they arrived at a diagnosis that was common, manageable, and seemingly logical: asthma. It made sense on paper. Krissy was a smoker, a habit she had picked up, largely because it was ubiquitous in the modeling industry of the 90s. Models smoked to curb appetites, to pass the time backstage, to manage the stress of constant scrutiny. The doctors likely conflated her symptoms with her smoking and perhaps some undiagnosed allergies. The diagnosis came with a solution. She was prescribed albuterol, the standard rescue inhaler for asthmatics. She also began using an over-the-counter spray widely available at the time called Primatene Mist. The family breathed a collective sigh of relief. Asthma was not life-threatening, not if managed correctly. It was a nuisance, not a death sentence. They thought they had the answer. They thought they were treating a respiratory condition. They had no way of knowing that the diagnosis was dead wrong. They had no way of knowing that Krissy's lungs were perfectly healthy. The problem was not in her airways. It was in the electrical wiring of her heart. And here lies the most devastating irony of this story. The medication she was given to save her was, in reality, a weapon. Primatene Mist and albuterol work by stimulating the beta receptors. They contain epinephrine, adrenaline. For a person with asthma, this opens the lungs. But for a person with a rare, electrically unstable heart condition, adrenaline is like pouring gasoline onto a smoldering fire. Every time Krissy felt that tightness in her chest, which was actually her heart struggling, she would take a puff of her inhaler. She was unknowingly blasting her compromised heart with stimulants, pushing it closer and closer to the edge. July 1st, 1995. The day before the world changed. The timeline of this day is important because of how unremarkable it was. If you are looking for a Last Supper moment, a profound speech, or a dramatic goodbye, you won't find it here. You will only find the quiet, comfortable routine of a family that assumed they had decades left together. It was a Saturday. The humid heat of Pembroke Pines hung heavy over the streets. Krissy was at the family home. It was supposed to be a safe haven, a break from the cameras. She wasn't Krissy Taylor, the supermodel, that day. She was just Krissy. There were no parties, there were no drugs. The rumors that would later swirl in the tabloids about a wild night of excess were cruel fabrications. The reality was domestic and calm. She spent time with her family. She spoke to friends. However, the asthma was bothering her. Throughout the evening of July 1st, Krissy complained that she couldn't quite catch her breath. The heaviness was back. Witnesses recall that she was using her inhalers more frequently that evening. The sound of the hiss puff became a backdrop to the night. She was self-medicating, trusting the doctor's orders, pumping more stimulants into her system in a desperate attempt to relieve the pressure in her chest. She told her family she loved them. She went to bed. The house fell silent. July 2nd, 1995, a Sunday. The early morning hours in a suburban home have a specific texture, a heavy muffled silence. The sun was not yet fully up. The sky was likely that deep pre-dawn indigo. Krissy Taylor, then just 20 years old, woke up early. Accounts vary slightly on the exact time, but it was roughly around 5 a.m. Perhaps it was intuition, perhaps the bond between sisters that transcends logic, or perhaps it was just random chance. Krissy walked into the living room area near the front door of the house. There, she found Krissy. Her little sister, the vibrant firecracker, was lying on the floor. She was face down. At first, the mind refuses to process such an image. You think they are sleeping. You think they have fainted. You think it is a joke. Krissy approached her. She called her name. There was no answer. The moment Krissy touched Krissy, the nightmare began. The police reports and subsequent interviews describe a scene of harrowing realization. Krissy was cold. To the touch, she was unmistakably, chillingly cold. Her face was marked with purple discoloration, a phenomenon known as livor mortis. This occurs when the heart stops pumping and gravity causes the blood to settle in the lowest points of the body. It was a visual confirmation that Krissy had not just fallen. She had been gone for some time. Nikki's scream shattered the silence of the Taylor household. It was a sound that summoned Ken and Barbara from their sleep, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. Ken Taylor rushed to the living room. As a lieutenant in the highway patrol, Ken was a man trained for crisis. He had seen accidents. He had seen death. He knew the protocols, but no amount of training prepares a father to see his teenage daughter lifeless on the floor of their own home. The 911 call placed from the Taylor residence is a recording of raw human devastation. Krissy was on the line, breathless, hysterical, struggling to convey the impossible to the operator. My sister, she's not breathing. She's cold. She's purple. While Krissy pleaded for help, Ken Taylor began CPR. He positioned himself over his daughter. He began chest compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. He tried to force air into her lungs. He tried to manually pump the organ that had failed her. Imagine the desperation of that room, the rhythmic thud of compressions, the pleading voices of a mother and sister, the agonizing wait for the siren. Ken pumped and pumped, fighting a battle that, medically speaking, had already been lost hours before. The heart that had graced the covers of Vogue had stopped, silent and still. The paramedics arrived swiftly. They took over, their movements practiced and urgent. They loaded Krissy onto the stretcher and rushed her to Memorial Hospital West. The sirens wailed, cutting through the quiet Sunday morning, waking the neighbors, signaling that something terrible had visited the Taylor home. But inside the ambulance and later in the emergency room, the monitors remained flat. There was no flicker of electrical activity. There was no pulse to find. At 5:39 a.m., the doctors made the call. They stepped back. The frantic activity ceased. Kristen Erin Taylor was pronounced dead. She was 17 years old. The sun came up over Florida. The world outside continued to spin. Coffee machines were turning on. Papers were being delivered. But inside the hospital, The Taylor family was standing on the precipice of a new, darker reality. The girl who had the world at her feet, the girl who wanted to be a wife, a mother, a normal woman, had gone to sleep and simply never woken up. The shock was total. It was a biological impossibility in the eyes of the public. Healthy teenagers do not just die. Supermodels do not just drop dead in their living rooms without a reason. And because there was no immediate reason, the world decided to invent one. As the Taylor family walked out of the hospital, broken and blinded by grief, the printing presses were already spinning up. The tabloids smelled blood. If a model dies young, they reasoned, it must be the lifestyle. It must be the sins of the industry. The tragedy of her death was about to be compounded by the cruelty of speculation. The fight for Krissy's life was over, but the fight for her reputation and for the truth about what killed her was just beginning. The battle for that truth, however, would have to be fought on two fronts, the medical and the reputational. While the family was still processing the physical loss of Krissy, they were immediately forced into a defensive crouch against a media machine that abhorred a vacuum. Silence was not an option when the tabloids were hungry for a scandal, and the Taylor family soon realized that their grief would not be afforded the privacy it deserved. In the absence of a clear truth, humanity has a dark tendency to invent one. In 1995, the 24-hour news cycle was in its infancy, but the tabloid press was at the peak of its predatory power. The morning after Krissy Taylor died, the machinery of celebrity scandal kicked into high gear. The narrative was almost too easy to write, a template pulled from the drawer of Hollywood tragedies. 17-year-old supermodel dead. To the cynics in the newsrooms, the blanks filled themselves. It had to be drugs. It had to be the excess of the heroin chic era catching up with a naive suburban girl. Or perhaps it was anorexia, the silent specter that haunted the runways of Paris and Milan. The headlines were ruthless. They didn't ask what happened. They insinuated why it happened. Whispers of a secret cocaine habit, of diet pills, of a wild party that went wrong, began to circulate. The paparazzi camped out on the lawns of Pembroke Pines, their lenses trained on a family that was drowning in shock. They were waiting for the smoking gun, the toxicology report that would reveal Krissy Taylor was just another cliche of fame gone wrong. But inside the house, amidst the tears, there was anger, a righteous, burning anger. The redneck girls, Krissy's close-knit circle of friends, watched the news in disbelief. They knew the girl who loved Greece and jet skis. They knew the girl who would devour a double cheeseburger without a second thought. They knew Krissy wasn't starving herself, and they certainly knew she wasn't doing drugs. The Taylor family stood firm against the tide of speculation. Ken and Barbara Taylor, despite their grief, had to become their daughter's public defenders. They issued statements. They allowed friends to speak to the press to correct the record. She was wholesome, they said. She was good. The police investigation quickly ruled out foul play. There were no signs of a struggle. There was no illicit paraphernalia in the room. And when the initial toxicology reports finally came back, they vindicated the family's stance. Negative. No cocaine, no heroin, no alcohol, no diet pills. The tabloids grew quiet on the drug angle, but the mystery deepened. If it wasn't Vice, what was it? The Broward County Medical Examiner's Office was tasked with solving the riddle. Dr. Michael Bell, the coroner, conducted the initial autopsy. He looked at the lungs. He looked at the history of inhaler use. He looked at the reported symptoms of shortness of breath. His conclusion, released to the public, was official but strangely hollow. Acute asthma attack. The report stated that mucus had plugged her airways, leading to asphyxiation complicated by a sudden cardiac arrhythmia. Essentially, they blamed her lungs. To the general public, this was an acceptable tragedy. Asthma kills. It is rare for it to kill so suddenly in someone with access to medication, but it happens. Case closed. But for the Taylor family, the puzzle pieces didn't fit. They knew asthma. They lived with it. They knew that a fatal asthma attack is usually a violent, prolonged struggle. The victim gasps, wheezes, and fights for air. It doesn't usually happen in silence. It doesn't usually strike a sleeping person so instantly that they don't even wake up to call for help. Ken and Barbara Taylor possessed a terrifying intuition. They looked at the coroner's report and they felt a deep, gnawing wrongness. This wasn't asthma. Krissy had used her inhaler, yes, but she had never had a severe attack before. She had never been hospitalized for it. Refusing to let Krissy go down in history as a simple medical statistic, the family made a decision that would change the course of cardiac medicine. They decided to challenge the diagnosis. They hired independent experts. They wanted her heart looked at again, not by a general coroner, but by the best specialists in the world. The samples of Krissy Taylor's heart tissue were sent to the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology in Washington, D.C., and later examined by arguably the world's leading expert on sudden cardiac death, Dr. Renu Virmani. Dr. Virmani did not look at the lungs. She looked deep into the architecture of the heart muscle itself. She placed the slides under the microscope, magnifying the cells of the right ventricle, the chamber responsible for pumping blood to the lungs. What she saw was a landscape of devastation. In a healthy heart, the wall of the right ventricle is a dense, tight weave of red muscle fibers. It is an engine built for endurance. But in Krissy's heart, that muscle was gone. It had been aggressively replaced by fat and fibrous scar tissue. The wall was paper thin, translucent in places. It wasn't asthma, it wasn't even close. Dr. Virmani contacted the family with a new, terrifying diagnosis: arrhythmogenic right ventricular dysplasia, ARVD. ARVD, sometimes called ARVC, cardiomyopathy, is a rare genetic heart defect. It is a chameleon of a disease. It hides. Here is the mechanism of the killer. The proteins that hold the heart cells together are defective. As the heart beats over the years, especially in an athletic person like Krissy who works her heart hard, these cells detach and die. The body, trying to repair the damage, replaces the dead muscle with fat and scar tissue. But fat cannot conduct electricity. The heart beats via an electrical wave that ripples through the muscle. When that wave hits the patches of fat in an ARVD heart, it scatters, it fragments, it causes a short circuit. Instead of a strong rhythmic thump-thump, the heart suddenly begins to quiver chaotically. This is called ventricular fibrillation. Blood stops flowing. The brain starves of oxygen. Collapse follows within seconds. Death follows within minutes. Dr. Virmani estimated that Krissy's right ventricle was so compromised that it was a ticking time bomb. But there was one final heartbreaking piece of the puzzle that the experts uncovered: the trigger. Why that night? Why July 2nd? The answer lay in the misdiagnosis. Remember the inhalers? Remember the Primatene mist? The doctors connected the dots. Krissy had been feeling tightness in her chest. She interpreted this as asthma because that's what she was told she had. In reality, that tightness was likely her heart struggling to push blood through the damaged ventricle. To treat the perceived asthma, she reached for her Primatene mist. But the epinephrine in that canister, essentially pure adrenaline, was not a cure. It was a catalyst. The medical consensus is haunting, but brutally simple. Every inhaler puff delivered a jolt of adrenaline to a heart that could not survive it. The medication designed to help her breathe became the very thing that stopped her heart. She didn't die from a vice. She didn't die from vanity. She died because she was trying to take care of herself, following a doctor's orders based on a diagnosis that was tragically incorrect. The revelation of ARVD changed everything. It vindicated Krissy's reputation. She was not a drug addict. She was a victim of a genetic anomaly. But it also brought a new immediate terror to the Taylor family. ARVD is genetic. It runs in families. The same DNA that built the Taylor look, the height, the beauty, might also carry the code for the Taylor curse. Dr. Vermani and the cardiologist issued an urgent directive: test the family immediately. Nikki Taylor, the surviving sister, the other half of the dynamic duo, had to be screened. Ken had to be screened. Barbara had to be screened. The grief of losing a daughter was suddenly compounded by the fear of losing another, or perhaps a parent. They hooked Nikki up to the monitors. The world held its breath. If Nikki had it, her career and her life was in immediate jeopardy. Nikki's results came back negative. Her heart was strong. Ken's results negative. But when they tested Barbara Taylor, the mother who had fought so hard to protect her daughters, the readout showed the shadow. Positive. Barbara Taylor had ARVD. She had the same condition that killed Krissy. For 50 years, she had lived with a ticking clock in her chest and never known it. The realization was bittersweet and devastating. Krissy's death was a tragedy, yes. But because she died, and because the family fought for the truth, Barbara was diagnosed. She could be put on beta blockers. She could be monitored. She could be saved. In a twist of fate that feels scripted by a Greek tragedian, Krissy Taylor, from beyond the grave, saved her mother's life. Yet this miraculous silver lining, the salvation of a mother through the loss of a daughter, brought with it a new agonizing clarity regarding the night of the death itself. The diagnosis of ARVD solved the medical mystery, but it exposed a logistical failure that would haunt the family. Understanding why Krissy died was one thing. Realizing that the tools to save her simply hadn't been within reach was a different kind of torment entirely. Grief is a heavy enough burden to carry, but the Taylor family was forced to carry something heavier, the burden of if only. Once the diagnosis was confirmed, the events of that July morning were replayed in the minds of the family with a new, agonizing clarity. They realized that the battle to save Krissy had been fought with the wrong weapons. Ken Taylor had performed CPR perfectly. He had done exactly what he was trained to do as a law enforcement officer. But CPR is a mechanical solution to an electrical problem. Compressions can keep oxygenated blood moving to the brain, which is vital, but they cannot reboot the computer. They cannot stop the chaotic quivering of a heart in ventricular fibrillation. There is only one thing that can stop that fatal rhythm and reset the heart's pacemaker: a defibrillator, an electric shock. In 1995, automated external defibrillators, AEDs, were not the ubiquitous devices they are today. You didn't see them in airports, malls, or schools. They were largely confined to hospitals and advanced ambulances. The police cruiser parked in the Taylor driveway that morning did not have one. The first responders who arrived initially did not have one immediately at hand in those critical first seconds. The family was haunted by a singular, tormenting thought. If an AED had been in the house or in the patrol car, Krissy Taylor might still be alive. The difference between life and death had been a small plastic box and a burst of electricity. Most families, when faced with such a loss, retreat into the shadows. They close the curtains and mourn in private. But the Taylors, forged in the fires of this tragedy, chose to go to war. They decided that Krissy's death would not be a punctuation mark, but a turning point. They established the Krissy Taylor Foundation. The mission was simple yet incredibly ambitious for the time: to put an AED in every police car in every high school in America. It was a crusade born of love and fury. Nikki Taylor, using her massive celebrity platform, became the face of the movement. She appeared on talk shows not to discuss fashion or makeup, but to talk about heart rhythms and sudden cardiac arrest. She sat on couches opposite Oprah and Larry King, holding back tears, educating a nation about a disease they had never heard of. This was a pivotal moment in public health awareness. Before Krissy Taylor's sudden cardiac arrest in young people was viewed as a freak occurrence, a lightning strike. The Taylors argued that it was a preventable tragedy. They raised money, millions of dollars, to purchase equipment for the Pembroke Pines Police Department and schools across Florida. Because of the Taylor family's advocacy, AEDs spread nationwide, a change now considered one of the most life-saving public health shifts of the 1990s. Today, these devices are standard in patrol cars, gyms, and schools across America. It is impossible to calculate exactly how many lives have been saved because a defibrillator was within reach when someone collapsed, but it is not an exaggeration to say that the number is in the thousands. Every time a teenager collapses on a basketball court and is shocked back to life by a coach using an AED, the legacy of Krissy Taylor is at work. While the foundation gave them a purpose, the personal toll on Nikki Taylor was immense. She was only 20 when Krissy died. She had lost not just a sister, but her other half. They were the Taylor sisters, a singular entity in the public eye. Without Krissy, Nikki described feeling like she had lost a limb, a phantom limb that she kept reaching for, only to find air. In the immediate aftermath of July 1995, Nikki Taylor found herself standing in a spotlight that had suddenly turned cold. For years, the sisters had been a dyad, a two-person force of nature. They balanced each other. Nikki was the calm, Krissy was the storm, Nikki was the poise, Krissy was the energy. With Krissy gone, Nikki was forced to navigate the treacherous waters of the fashion industry alone. But it was worse than being alone. She was haunted by her own reflection. The cruel genetics of sisterhood meant that every time Nikki looked in the mirror, she saw echoes of the sister she had lost. Every time a makeup artist contoured her cheekbones or a photographer asked for a smile, the ghost of Krissy was present in the room. The industry, in its insatiable demand for content, wanted Nikki to carry on as if nothing had happened. They wanted the Taylor magic to continue. But Nikki was operating through a fog of grief that few could comprehend. She described feeling like a twinless twin. Although they were born 3 years apart, their souls were braided together. For a brief period, Nikki tried to fulfill the contracts. She tried to smile for the cameras, but the joy had evaporated. The specific alchemy that made the Taylor sisters global icons was broken. Nikki eventually pulled back, retreating from the high-voltage lifestyle of Milan and Paris to focus on something real, something tangible, her survival, and the preservation of her sister's memory. But the Taylor family's trials were not over. By the turn of the millennium, they had become a subject of dark fascination. In the public imagination, they were beginning to resemble the Kennedys, a dynasty blessed with impossible gifts but haunted by an equally impossible darkness. The death of Krissy in 1995 was the first strike, but the world watched with bated breath as the Taylor curse seemed to circle back for the survivor. In May 2001, 6 years after Krissy's passing, Nikki Taylor was involved in a single car accident in Atlanta. The details were horrific. The car she was a passenger in hydroplaned off the road and struck a utility pole. While the driver walked away with minor injuries, Nikki suffered catastrophic internal trauma. Her liver was torn in half. Her spine was damaged. She lost 80% of her blood volume. For weeks, Nikki lay in a coma at Grady Memorial Hospital. The media vans returned, the headlines resurfaced. Tragedy strikes the Taylors again. It felt cruel, almost scripted. The public wondered, can one family endure the loss of both golden daughters? But inside that hospital room, a different story was unfolding, one of defiance. Nikki's survival is medically considered a miracle. She underwent over 40 surgeries. And when she finally woke, when she finally spoke about those dark weeks in the void, she didn't speak of fear, she spoke of Krissy. Nikki has often described a sensation she felt while hovering between life and death. She felt she was not alone. She felt that Krissy was there, standing at the gate, essentially telling her, not yet, you have to go back. Mom and Dad can't take this twice. Whether you believe in the spiritual or the psychological, the impact is the same. Krissy's memory became the anchor that pulled Nikki back to the living. The bond between the sisters, forged in the bedroom of their childhood home and cemented under the studio lights, proved stronger than death itself. For Ken and Barbara Taylor, the survival of Nikki was a reprieve, but it didn't erase the absence of Krissy. Grief, over 30 years, changes its shape. In the beginning, it is a sharp, jagged rock. Over time, it becomes a smooth stone, still heavy, still there, but easier to carry in your pocket. The family ensured she was not just a memory. She was an active participant in their lives. Her name is spoken freely. Her photos are not hidden away in a mournful shrine, but displayed with joy. They achieved what few families in the public eye managed to do. They reclaimed their daughter from the tabloids. Beyond the personal triumphs of the family, Krissy Taylor left a significant scientific legacy. Her case is now cited in medical textbooks. She became the index case for understanding how ARVD presents in young women. Before Krissy, there was a gender bias in cardiology. Heart disease was often viewed as a man's problem or something that only affected the elderly. Young, athletic women were often dismissed as having anxiety or asthma, just as Krissy was. Her autopsy results forced cardiologists to re-evaluate their diagnostic criteria. Now, when a young female athlete presents with shortness of breath and palpitations, doctors are far less likely to reach for the asthma inhaler first. They order an EKG. They look at the heart's electrical waves. They ask about family history. The red flags of ARVD are now taught to medical students, with Krissy's story often serving as the warning. The tragedy of her misdiagnosis has likely saved countless other young women from the same fate. She silenced the dismissal of symptoms. She forced the medical community to listen to the teenage girl who says, "My chest feels heavy." In a fascinating turn of events, the internet age has given Krissy Taylor a second life. A new generation of fashion enthusiasts, Gen Z and Alpha, has discovered the 90s. They are mining the archives of Vogue and Elle on TikTok and Instagram. They are rediscovering Krissy. Scroll through the comments on vintage fashion videos, and you will see teenagers who weren't even born when Krissy died, posting about her. They are captivated by her fresh face. They comment on how she looks real compared to the filtered, face-tuned influencers of today. Krissy has become an icon of naturalism. In an era of artificial enhancement, her athletic frame, her distinct nose, her wild eyebrows, and her tomboy energy feel radical. She is being celebrated not just for how she looked, but for the vibe she projected. Unpretentious, energetic, and authentically American. She has become a comfort character for a digital generation, a symbol of a pre-social media innocence that many young people long for. As we close the book on the life of Krissy Taylor, what are we left with? We are left with a medical breakthrough regarding ARVD that continues to save lives and a foundation that put defibrillators in the hands of heroes. We are left with a surviving sister who walked through fire and came out the other side. But mostly, we are left with the girl herself. Krissy Taylor serves as a permanent reminder to check on the strong ones. She was the athlete. She was the firecracker. She was the one who seemed invincible. Her story teaches us that health is not always visible, that strength is not always protection, and that life is terrifyingly random. But her legacy teaches us something else too. It teaches us that a life, no matter how short, can have a thunderous impact. Krissy Taylor only had 17 years. She never finished high school. She never fell in love. She never saw the world change. And yet, 30 years later, we are still talking about her. We are still learning from her heart, a heart that failed her physically, but spiritually was big enough to leave a mark on the world that time cannot erase. As we move further away from 1995, the sharp edges of grief begin to soften, but the image of Krissy remains crystalline. If you search for her today, you will find the photos, the Vogue covers, the 17 spreads. But the image that haunts the most is that final Ocean Drive cover. The two sisters, heads leaning together, the Florida sun illuminating their blonde hair. They look so alike, yet so distinct. Nikki, the calm, classical beauty. Krissy, the spark, the energy, the one with the mischievous glint in her eye. It is a portrait of a bond that death could snap, but not sever. Krissy Taylor never aged. She never had to endure the fading of beauty, the harshness of the tabloids in the digital age, or the cynicism of adulthood. She remains forever 17. She is the eternal teenager of the 90s, a symbol of a time when the world seemed a little brighter, a little simpler. The sun still rises over Pembroke Pines. The waves still crash on the Florida beaches where she used to jet ski. And somewhere in the quiet hum of the universe, the redneck girl is still laughing, forever young, forever free, and forever loved.